So one of my mods on Twitch, Blade, has often contemplated for the longest time using his channel points on me reviewing his favorite film of all time. He had often put it off because he didn't want my channel to peak too early, but he finally decided to do it. So today we are reviewing Blade's favorite film of all time, The Exorcist, released in 1973. Directed by William Friedkin, the movie was based off a novel released 2 years earlier written by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote this film as well. A lot went into making this film, and there were a lot of production errors, including a fire destroying the majority of the set, which resulted in production taking twice as long, and the movie costing twice as much as the original budget. The film ended up costing about $12 million, but holy shit did it make it back in droves, grossing about $441 million at the box office. That number made it the highest grossing R-rated horror film all the way up until 2017, when it was finally surpassed by It. It's also worth noting that the director, William Friedkin, was kind of a major dick, and he utilized old school director tactics on this movie. And by that I mean he did not inform the actors of many of the stunts that they were going to do, which resulted in some long-term injuries for certain actors. Ellen Bernstein, who played Chris MacLeod, had her spine injured after she was jerked back by a cable from a stuntman a lot harder than she was told was going to happen. There's also a case of him slapping an actor as hard as he could across the face to get a more genuine emotional reaction out of him, and Jason Miller, who played Father Damien Karras, got pea soup thrown in his face when he wasn't expecting it. I'll explain that a little bit later. And this film caused quite the stir among audiences when they saw it in films. There were even heart attacks and miscarriages reported upon people seeing it, although I kinda doubt that, but who knows. And of course, parents who are afraid to actually be parents were afraid of too many kids seeing this film, so several cities attempted to ban it or just prevent kids from seeing it altogether. But what exactly is this historic horror movie about? Well, basically it's about a young child named Regan who ends up being possessed by a demon. Her mother, Chris, tries to do all she can to help her as the demon starts to take her over more and more, until she finally turns to the act of an exorcism. But were they able to successfully exorcise this demon from Regan? Well, we're going to find out right now as we review The Exorcist, released in 1973. So I'd like to specify at the beginning here that the version of this movie I'm using for the review is the extended director's cut, aka the version you've never seen as it was called, released in the year 2000, and it's about 11 minutes longer than the original cut. But anyway, our film begins in Iraq, where a Catholic priest named Lancaster Marion is there on an archaeological dig. Some of his colleagues discover a little sculpture which seems to resemble a demon called Pazuzu, who he seems to be familiar with. After having visions of the demon, he ends up coming across a statue of it, and the camera pans to show it looking like he's facing off with it, hinting at a future confrontation. But anyway, let's now head to Georgetown, Washington, D.C., where 12-year-old Regan MacLeod lives with her mother, Chris. Chris is also an actress, and she's starring in a film directed by one of her friends, Burke Dennings. We then meet Father Damien Karras, who seems to be losing his faith in God as he tends to his elderly mother who has a foot injury. Back at the MacLeod household, Regan reveals she's been playing with a Ouija board, and she now has an imaginary friend named Captain Howdy. Later that night, she sleeps in Chris's bed after she claims that her bed was shaking, and Chris also hears some sounds coming from the attic, but she can't seem to find anything. The next day, Chris takes Regan to the doctor's for a checkup, where her behavior starts becoming increasingly erratic. The doctor just seems to think she's increasingly hyperactive and prescribes her some sedatives to calm her down. Meanwhile, Father Karras' mother has now been relocated to an elderly hospital by her brother, and she feels betrayed, thinking that Damien did this to her. Back at Chris's house, she hosts a house party with a bunch of her friends, and everything seems to be going pretty well. Well, pretty well until Regan comes downstairs in a trance and stares right at an astronaut in the room, telling him that he's gonna die up in space before pissing on the floor. The next day, a Father Joseph Dyer goes to check up on Father Karras, as his mother has unfortunately passed away. Karras also has bad dreams involving his mother, and possibly some visions of a demon. So meanwhile, Chris has taken Regan back to the doctors, and the doctors now think there's something wrong with her brain, so they decide to perform a cerebral angiography. And I want to warn you, this cerebral angiography is very realistic. Like, very shockingly realistic. very, very, very realistic. So if you're easily squeamish, this is probably the most squeamish scene of the whole movie, so warning you ahead of time. Oh, and also, fun fact, the guy who played the radiologist in this scene ended up killing a guy 7 years later and going to prison for 20 years, so that's a fun fact. Afterwards, they're reviewing the test results, but Chris calls them to the house as Regan is head-banging out. She then starts talking in a demon voice and masturbating with a cross, and it's all bad. The doctors still think it's some kind of brain condition, but it's gotta be mental, surely, so they decide it's time to go to the psychiatrist. One night after Chris has met with them, she comes home to find Regan's window wide open and her room freezing. Turns out she had left Burke Dennings to babysit her, who she later finds out died after falling out of the window. Uh-oh. But anyway, fuck that shit, here's Regan! The next day, Regan and a supposed person inside of her end up getting hypnotized by a psychiatrist who she ends up attacking. Father Karras, meanwhile, who's out on a run, ends up meeting a Lieutenant William Kinderman who's investigating the death of Burt Dennings. Apparently when Dennings was found, his head was completely turned the other way around, and the reason why he's coming to the priest is that Kinderman thinks there might be something black magic-y going on here. He presses Karras on the subject of witchcraft because he knows that he knows something about it, having written a paper on it, but Karras doesn't give him much information. Chris, meanwhile, is meeting with a whole team of doctors who cannot seem to find any viable solution for what's going on with Regan. Until one doctor finally recommends the last resort method, an exorcism. Back at home, Chris finds a cross in Regan's room and she's unsure of who put it there. She's then visited by Detective Kinderman, who also gives her the details on how Dennings died. And after learning this information, Chris realizes that it was probably Regan who killed Burke Dennings. Speaking of Regan, she's upstairs masturbating with a cross again, so that's fun. And after shoving her mother's face in her crotch, she slaps her across the room, and this scene right here is actually where Ellen Bernstein suffered the back injury when the harness pulled her, and the scream that she let out was actually her real scream of pain, and they left it in the movie. So Chris really wants to get this exorcism going now, and she arranges a meeting with Father Karras. Father Karras doesn't seem to believe that there's anything going on that would warrant an exorcism, but he agrees to meet with Regan anyway. Demon Regan then taunts him with his mother's death, but Karras calls her bluff and asks her what his mother's maiden name is, and she promptly vomits in his face. And this is that pea soup scene I was talking about. The actor Jason Miller was fully prepared to take it in the chest, but not in the face, which prompted his genuine disgusted reaction. Over the coming days, Karras seems to believe more and more that Regan might actually be possessed after he records a conversation with her, which reveals that she was actually speaking in English backwards. And also, Chris lets the cat out of the bag that Regan did kill Burke Dennings. But he's finally sent over the edge when Chris's assistant Sharon calls him over in the middle of the night, and it's revealed that on Regan's stomach the words "Help me" are written. Father Karras then officially goes to the church to ask for permission to do the exorcism, which they grant him. However, they decide he needs some more experienced help on this, and they call Father Langston Murrin from the beginning of the film to assist him on it. Father Murrin arrives and they begin the exorcism, which is going decently well, although it's emotionally draining. The demon also continues to wear Karras down by taunting him further with his mother's death. And as the two priests take a break, it appears the process is taking a very physical toll on Father Murrin as well. While Murrin is in the bathroom, Karras is having visions that the demon is his mother, and my god, it is really doing him in. Murrin decides to send him out of the room to collect himself, while he continues the exorcism himself. After Chris asks Father Karras if Regan is gonna die, that gives Karras his strength back, and he decides to go back into the room. However, as he re-enters, he finds that Father Murrin has died of a heart attack while he was out of the room. The demon giggles at this, which sends Karras completely over the edge, and he's like, fuck it, it's punching time. He then instructs the demon to transfer itself into him, to which it obliges. However, as his final act of will, he hurls himself out the window, killing himself and taking the demon with him. Father Dyer then arrives on the scene and reads Karras' last rites, and this is the scene I was talking about before, where the director slapped him to make him more emotional, and to be fair, it worked. So we're wrapping up the film now, and a little while later, Regan and Chris are deciding to move the hell on out of there. probably a good call. They meet Father Dyer as they're leaving, and Regan does not remember anything that went on. However, upon seeing Father Dyer's clerical collar, she's possessed, no pun intended, to kiss him on the cheek. Kristen stops the car to give Father Dyer Father Karras' necklace, but he thinks she should keep it instead. We then get a shot of Father Karras going over and looking down the stairs, which in the original was the ending, but we have a little bit of an extension here. He walks back to the house where he meets Detective Kinderman, who was trying to see the MacLeods off, but he just missed him. The detective then asks the father if he wants to go see a film, but he's already seen it, so they form a friendship and decide to get lunch instead. Interesting extended ending there. It's arguably more wholesome. It ends in friendship. That's the ultimate message of this movie, friendship. So this movie at this point is 48 years old. 48 years old, and it is shocking how incredibly well 48 years later this movie still holds up. I mean, there's been films about possession since this film, but I honestly don't think any film has done it quite as good as this. The closest I've personally seen was The Conjuring. I think The Conjuring is very close to this movie in terms of all-time possession films, but I really think this still takes the cake. This is just an incredible movie. Some of the stuff in this is genuinely uncomfortable though, I gotta say. Like that medical scene, again, shockingly accurate. There's a lot of blood, and if you're squeamish, just yeah. And some of the scenes are hard to watch knowing the tactics the director used. And I mean, he doesn't regret any of it. If you see the documentary, he just laughs about, you know, Ellen Bernstein getting that spinal injury. He just laughs about it. So yeah, he's kind of a dick, I'm not gonna lie, he's kind of a dick. He's a brilliant director, but he's kind of a dick. And it's funny that this is one of the best films ever made, because it was actually followed by a sequel film, Exorcist 2, 4 years later, which is widely considered to be one of the worst films ever made. So maybe we'll cover that at some point. But in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I've talked before about movies that are must-see if you want to watch some of the greatest films of all time, and this is up there in terms of greatest horror films of all time. It could be the best, to be honest. It could be the most disturbing movie you ever see, even though it was released 48 years ago. It could be the best horror movie you ever see. And if you're looking to see the greatest films ever, you gotta put this on the list. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to do it for my review of The Exorcist 1973. Thank you so much to Blade for using your channel points on this. I hope you enjoyed it, buddy. I know how much you love this film, and don't worry, I finally did it. But that is going to do it for me this week. Next week on the channel, we will be covering The Avengers, made in 1998. Apparently, it's really bad. It's based off the film series, the British film series from, I think, the 70s, and it's got Sean Connery and Uma Thurman in it, so you'd think it'd be good, but apparently, it's not. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to follow the channel, be sure to press the subscribe button. If you liked the video, like it. If you didn't, don't. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're all in the description down below. Thank you to all my Patrons for supporting me and my channels. With all that being said, though, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my review of The Exorcist, released in 1973, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.